We'll give it one more minute, then we can start.
Wonder if y'all could drop in the chat where you're from. Curious to know where everybody is.
Cool. Well, we can get started and we'll just let people in as they show up. But yeah, like Elizabeth said, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, say where you're from. It's nice to get to know people that are on the call. But hi, everyone. My name is Sam Schmitz. I'm the DC events coordinator for Moms Clean Air Force. There's a couple of other folks from Moms that are here. I'll let them introduce themselves when they're talking. We also have the nice Moms Clean Air Force logo in the back doing the live stream and recording. So just flagging that in case anyone doesn't want to be recorded or live streamed, that is happening. So just a heads up there. But yeah, I will just start sharing my screen. We're going to go through how to write comments for the EPA's Soot rule and how to make your voice heard in that rulemaking process. Let me work on getting the screen share going. Hold on. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this now. We'll go into present mode and hopefully you can see less of the other nonsense. But yeah, just a brief intro is that we're writing comments to tell the US EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, that we want stronger protections for our families, for our communities, for public health, to protect us from soot. And I will pass it to Elizabeth Béchard to introduce herself and talk about what soot is.
Thank you, Sam. My name is Elizabeth Béchard. I'm a senior policy analyst with Moms Clean Air Force. I'm in Vermont today on the unceded lands of the Abenaki peoples. Excited to have you all here. And we wanted to start by just sort of making sure we're all on the same page about what soot is. So soot is the common name for a kind of air pollution that also goes by many other names. You'll also hear it talked about as particle pollution, particulate matter, or PM 2.5. And it's a kind of air pollution that consists of tiny, tiny, tiny droplets or particles in the air. They are so small that they're 2.5 microns or less in diameter. That's where the 2.5 comes from. We can't see individual particles with our eyes, and that's what makes them so dangerous to our health. They are so tiny that they can become easily inhaled into our lungs and into our bloodstream. So we have other mechanisms in our body like coughing and sneezing that help us expel larger particles from our body, but those mechanisms don't work with particles that are so small that they can really get into our whole bodies. Soot can be generated from a number of sources. One of the most important of those sources is the burning of fossil fuels for energy. So soot or particle pollution comes from things like power plants or factories, industrial processes, vehicle exhaust is the major source. Is this tire friction on roads, agriculture, and increasingly wildfires. The next slide, Sam. So the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency is tasked with setting what are called national ambient air quality standards for a variety of air pollutants that are especially dangerous for human health, and particle pollution or soot is one of those pollutants. The standards the EPA sets are meant to be guided by the best possible science and to protect public health, knowing that these air pollutants have a huge burden on our health. And so last month, the EPA released a proposal for the standards, the air quality standards for particle pollution that we believe was a step in the right direction, but emphatically does not go go far enough. And with the proposal that came out last month, there are really two components that you need to know about. There is what we call an annual standard, which addresses the levels of particle pollution or soot that people are exposed to over a period of time, over the period of a year. So it's looking at sort of the cumulative health impacts of exposure to this kind of air pollution. There's also what we call a 24-hour or a daily standard, which is meant to address the health impact of short-term spikes in air pollution. And these short-term spikes in air pollution are often associated with, factory processes or, heavy traffic days. And so communities that live near the sources of pollution are disproportionately impacted by these short-term spikes in particle pollution. And so with the annual standard, EPA proposed a slight reduction or a slight strengthening rather of our current standard, which is 12, to a range of 9 to 10 micrograms per cubic meter. And when you think of micrograms per cubic meter, you can think of a box of air and how many of these little particles would be floating around in that box of air and still be considered, safe for human health. So EPA has strengthened or proposed strengthening the annual standard a little bit. But they didn't propose a standard that was as strong as we wanted it to be. EPA is supposed to be guided by the guidance of something called the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee, or the CASAC. This is an independent scientific advisory board that looks at all of the public health data, all of the research that's available, and guides EPA's decision. And this CASAC advisory board suggested that annual standard of 8 would be stronger and more health protective than what EPA has proposed. And what we're really disappointed about is that the current proposal on the table by EPA completely fails to address strengthening the 24-hour standard. And this Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee had suggested that standard should be strengthened from its current standard of 35 micrograms per cubic meter down to 25. And they've declined to strengthen this standard at all. And so that's one of the things that we're hoping to really emphasize in our comments to EPA is that we really want both of the standards that they've proposed to be stronger, but especially underlining that we really need people to be protected from short-term spikes in air pollution with a stronger 24-hour standard. I'm going to pass it back to Sam and maybe over to Liz.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. Super helpful to have all of that context. Luckily, none of you have to be experts like Elizabeth is. It's really just about sharing your personal story, which we'll help you do in a second. But if Liz is around, she can explain how the EPA works and what we're actually doing with them.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you all so much for joining us today. So here we have a step chart about sort of how the EPA rulemaking process works, but I think the most important thing to recognize about this is EPA is set up to hear from the public, and you don't need to be an expert to weigh in and say what's important to you, your community, your family. I'm a social worker. I'm not a science expert. So I'm telling the EPA what I know to be true about what my family needs from the standards that they set. I, as a parent, can't create clean air for my children, but I know that they need that to be healthy. And so I make an effort to help EPA see that perspective. So I'm Elizabeth Brandt. I'm National Field Manager for Moms Clean Air Force. I live on the traditional lands of the Anacostan, Nacotchtank, and Piscataway peoples. I put a link in the chat in case it's of interest to you to learn about the Indigenous peoples in your own area. You can take a look at that land map whenever you have time if you're interested. So basically, the EPA sets itself up to accept comment in particular times. It's not really accepting comment about air standards just any old time. It's accepting them every few years. So this is one of those moments where the EPA is wanting and accepting comment on the soot or particulate matter standards. So step one, the EPA proposes a regulation. So, that comes up in the Federal Register, and people who follow these things like clean air lawyers tell us when those things are happening. And then it's up to advocates to make the most of that opportunity. So in this case, the EPA proposed a regulation. They're proposing to strengthen the clean air standard. but not as much as scientists say is necessary for our health, as Elizabeth Béchard just mentioned. So that has already happened in this Soot rulemaking process. And so what we're doing right now, today, yesterday, today, tomorrow, the EPA considers comments and issues a rule. So between now and March 28th, people can sign petitions and you submit their testimony and let them know how they feel about what has been proposed. So this is the moment where moms like me are saying, you know, nice that you've made this step in the right direction, but we really need you to strengthen the 24-hour rule to protect people from short-term spikes in pollution that we know send people to the hospital, have very immediate health impacts, and also to strengthen the average or the annual standard as well to protect us every day from high air pollution. So the EPA actually has to read and consider and listen to all of these comments and take that into account in issuing their final rule, which will come out sometime after March 28th when they stop accepting comments. The process takes a little time. But for all of that, what I really want everybody here to know is it's just so important that you do sort of understand just a little bit about how EPA works, only so that you can be heard. I know that for me, I grew up in a town with a smelter, which has greatly impacted the health of the people in my hometown. And, you know, at the point where I became concerned about the smelter in my town, and I was 17, all the decisions have been made, right? The EPA wasn't really looking for comment on how I felt about the cleanup plan that they put forward. They had already done that and moved on, right? So we want to make sure that people who even maybe aren't as aware of this issue become aware, because this is a really crucial moment when you actually can be heard. And that's not every day. So there are a couple of ways to move forward from here, and Sam can go over them. But one thing I'll emphasize is there are public hearings going on virtually today and tomorrow. And even if you didn't register for them, you can get on and give a comment, and we'll tell you how to do that later on. And we want you to be heard, even if this feels new for you. So thank you all for participating. And I think that's everything.
Yeah, great overview. And at the end, we'll definitely try to remember to give you all the information for actually testifying, since I think Liz is listening to those right now while she's on here. So that's another impactful way to make your voice heard. But today we're going to be doing something a little bit easier than that, which is just writing your comments down, which are weighted evenly as people testifying. So your comment is going to have just as much influence as anyone that stands up in front of EPA virtually at this point, and gives their testimony that way. So the structure of this workshop moving forward will just kind of be, this is a 4-part comment. We're going to have you do an introduction, talk a little bit about why you think these standards are important. Again, you don't have to be an expert. You're not going to have to talk about all of the science. You can maybe pick 1 or 2 points that will kind of lay out for you that you think are particularly important to you. And then after that, you can talk about just why you care and your personal reason for testifying. And then you'll just do a quick conclusion, reiterating the point that the EPA has to take action. So after each of these steps, we'll give everyone 5 or so minutes to kind of craft that part of their statement, and then we'll move on to the next one. So you'll be writing these comments in real time. And feel free to jump in if you have questions at any time. But we will start with the introduction. So this is just a very simple template for everyone. So at this point, you can start writing, whether it's on paper and pencil or online. Either way is great. At the end of this, we'll have a form for everyone to submit it. So you can either submit the actual text that you've typed up or a picture of what you've written. So either way is good with us. But this introduction is just kind of telling the EPA who you are and why you care and what you care about. So you can literally write exactly what's on this slide if you want to. That's super easy. We try and make it as easy as possible for everyone, but they want to know your name and where you're from, and they want to know what you're asking of them. So the big ask from us is that we want them to set a more protective standard of 8 micrograms per cubic meter for the annual standard and 25 micrograms per cubic meter for the daily standard. So I will give everyone a couple of minutes to write this down. Again, feel free to copy it exactly or paraphrase or just introduce yourself to the EPA. Does anyone have any questions on this part? I know this is probably the easiest part of the comments so far. Okay, I'll give everyone like another minute maybe, and then we'll go to the next part. I would also say that these comments are going to be public at some point. So definitely just keep it to writing your town and state. Don't put your whole address on there. They do want to know where you're from, but they don't need to know your actual address. Does anyone need more time, or do we want to move on to the next one? Good.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
In terms of the format of the document and when we submit,
Mhm.
how should we frame the title of the testimony, or who it's directed to or anything like that? Just in
Yeah.
terms of how the document looks for submission. Yeah, just some clarification on that.
Totally. Good question. You can literally just write Dear EPA. It doesn't really have to be anything more than that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to the next part. So the next part is just talking about why you think it's necessary that the EPA takes action and sets stronger, more protective soot standards. So this is kind of similar to what Elizabeth talked about before. It's the actual science behind your testimony or your comment and why you think this is a really important thing that they must do scientifically to protect communities, to protect families and to protect lives. So here are a number of different potential things that you could talk about. Don't feel like you need to talk about all of these. So something I wrote about in my comment is that I have asthma. And I know that when soot is more prevalent in the air, that really aggravates my asthma and makes it harder for me to breathe. And I know that there's millions of other people in the US that have the same issue. So if any of these different impacts speak to you or have influenced you or your family, that's a perfect thing to talk about. And if not, you can just say that soot contributes to over 100,000 US deaths every year, something impactful like that. So take a look at these and try to just pick one or two things out that you think are just really important to you and put that into your testimony. And then after this, we will try to connect that back to your personal story and why it matters to you. Does anyone have any questions on this part? I think one thing that's pretty clear about the Soot standards is that unfortunately, this impacts everyone, as you can see from the list of health impacts. So all of these different outcomes and impacts have pretty much touched the lives of everyone in the US. So again, we just want everyone to understand that your voice is really important in this process because you probably have been affected in some way. And nobody's voice is more important than others. And we want the EPA to hear as many stories and as many impacts as they possibly can. So just feel free to share whatever you're comfortable with, and anything that you think might have had an impact on you. We'll do maybe like 30 more seconds. Does anyone need more time or are we good for now? Good. Perfect. Okay, so the next part is just tying that last part, the kind of science heavy part, to why you're testifying or why you're commenting, and why you care about this issue. So a couple of questions to think about when you start writing. Again, this can be anything that this makes you think of or feel like. That's all great to share. A couple questions that you might want to think about are, do you have a health condition that's worsened by air pollution? Has this personally affected you? Has it personally affected a family member, a community member? Any story that you might have. Do you live near a source of soot pollution? So a highway, an industrial area, lots of other things. And then obviously these have really disproportionate impacts based on who you are and where you are likely to live. So if you want to touch on those environmental injustice aspects, feel free to do that as well. And another question to just prompt your thoughts are, do you just worry about the impact of air pollution on yourself, your family, your community? That's very valid as well if you're just worrying about this issue because you know it's so impactful. You can feel free to write as much or as little as you want. This is definitely the most important part of your comment because it's what makes it unique and it's what makes your story your own. And that's really what the EPA wants to hear. They want to hear from normal people and how it's impacting real communities because they get the science perspective from a lot of different angles. And it's really important for us to also bring the kind of human perspective from just people that care and people that are impacted. We'll give it maybe 1 more minute. After this, we're just going to write a little conclusion, and then we can do kind of question and answer if people have any questions, and we'll help people submit their comments. Does anyone need more time? Good. Okay, cool. So the last part is just your conclusion. So again, we gave a pretty simple template here. You can literally copy and paste this if you want, or you can write something more unique if you would like, but something along the lines of, once again, the EPA's proposed soot standard doesn't go far enough. It's leaving many communities with dangerous levels of soot pollution. Please take action to protect my family and community, and thank you for your time. Something along those lines is perfect. Whatever you feel like is right. Another aspect of this that people have done in the past is they've included photos to help tell their story. So something I could do is include a picture of my asthma inhaler. People have done that before. People have put pictures of a place threatened by soot pollution that they might live by or see. Family portraits or pictures of kids whose future that you care about, anything to just really humanize the issue for the EPA and show them that this is really important to you and your family. So we'll have an opportunity for you to upload any of those pictures after this. Does anyone have any questions? You can also add like a sincerely your name at the end if you want to make it like formal letter style. Okay, maybe like 30 more seconds on this. Okay. So next, we're just going to submit these. So we're going to have you put them right into a form so that we can send them to the EPA. There is a way to upload them, or upload a picture of a written comment, or you can obviously copy and paste whatever you texted. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can put this link in the chat for you all. And we can go from there. Let me just send this link. There you go. Does anyone have any questions so far?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So I will be providing a testimony, but on behalf of my organization. When it comes to describing our community, our family, and like my experience, it's okay to say like the community of my organization represents experiences such and such. Correct? So like instead of saying I and my experience, can I speak on behalf of my community and the one that I'm representing?
Yeah, Elizabeth, I saw you shaking your head.
Yes,
So.
that's absolutely fine. Yeah, thanks for asking that.
Thank you.
Is anyone having any issues with the form, or is that smooth sailing so far? Maybe I will actually share my screen again, since I know this is being live streamed and people on there might want the link. And now that you guys have it in the chat, I will go back to having this on the screen, I think. Okay, hopefully people online can see that now. But Liz, if you're still around and you want to talk about how people can jump on to the testimonies today, might be a good time for that. Okay, Liz might have had to jump. Elizabeth, do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to talk about it?
Trying to find my way off of mute. You can talk about it, Sam, or I mean, I can put the link to the Zoom in the chat if that's useful.
Yeah, that would be great if you could add that link. But I guess more context is that, like Liz was saying, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, the EPA is listening to people share these types of comments as testimony. So people are basically saying them on Zoom in front of EPA officials. Granted, the EPA officials are still going to read your comments, but if you feel like you could your story would be particularly valuable if you were able to speak it to them and actually talk to them somewhat face to face, even though it's virtual. They are allowing people to kind of hop on to this Zoom link that Elizabeth just put into the chat and share their testimonies when they have extra time. So often that is at the end of different kind of sections that they have. So the way that we timed this workshop, we figured that they might have some time next around 12:30 because their session ends at 1 and then it'll pick back up and they might have some more time around, I think, 2:30 as well. So you're obviously welcome to go sit on that Zoom and wait your turn, but you could also just wait until kind of 12:30 or 2:30 and hopefully you'll be able to get some time there. And they have people on that Zoom link that are there as tech support, and you can send them a message and say that you want to testify today and ask if they are going to have any extra time. You're able to literally just read what you wrote today, read anything that you've written before, or just talk to them. They do limit each slot to 4 minutes, but that is usually enough time for people. But hopefully people have been able to submit their comments by now. But we also wanted to open this up to Q&A. So if anyone has questions about Soot, the Soot rule, how to comment, Elizabeth and I are both here to help answer any questions. And if there's no questions, thank you all for commenting and for joining our workshop and learning how to do this. We're hoping we'll have more sessions like this in the future as there are future EPA rules that come out. This was kind of a pilot program for us in terms of helping people write these comments. So hopefully you enjoyed it and learned something and feel like your voice was heard. So thank you all, and don't forget to submit your comments so that we can actually send them over to the EPA. Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to say anything, but
just thank you all for being here, and thank you, Sam, for leading this for us. We're excited to have your comments go straight to EPA.
definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining, Leslie. We'll stay on the line for a couple minutes in case people have questions they want to ask afterwards, but thanks again, everyone. Danielle, I think we're probably good.